All right, everybody, welcome back to another deep dive on Voices of the Soul. Today we are going to be looking at a Reddit post that went pretty viral and got a lot of discussion. And it's about this couple that's watching a movie and the dynamic in their relationship.
Sounds juicy.
Yeah, and so the post comes from the subreddit Advice, and it's this guy who's asking for advice after a conversation with his girlfriend went a little bit sideways. And he was just looking for some outside perspective. So are you ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so here's the situation. The couple's watching a movie, like a typical action movie.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where there's a damsel in distress, and the man, swoops in and protects her from danger. And the girlfriend turns to the boyfriend and she says, "I would never want you to do that. You're not a meat shield for me to hide behind." So what do you think about that statement?
I think that's really interesting because it could be interpreted in a few different ways. On the one hand, she could be trying to communicate that she wants to be seen as an equal, as someone who is capable and strong and doesn't need saving. But it also kind of comes across as dismissive, like a little bit critical of his, instinct to protect her.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like she's saying, "I don't need you to save me."
Yeah.
But it's also kind of like, "Don't even try to save me."
Right, exactly. And that's where things get tricky because the boyfriend, he's understandably confused. So he asks a clarifying question. He says, "So if something like that happened, I shouldn't try to protect you." And that's when things go downhill.
Yeah.
The girlfriend gets upset. She refuses to talk about it, and she just shuts down completely.
So we got this major communication breakdown.
Yeah.
What do you think is going on here from the boyfriend's perspective?
Well, I imagine he's feeling pretty hurt and confused. Like he's just asked a genuine question looking for clarification.
Yeah.
And her response is totally unexpected.
Yeah, he's probably feeling blindsided.
Totally blindsided.
And this whole thing sparked a huge debate in the comments section of this Reddit post. People were chiming in with all sorts of opinions. One commenter, who goes by the username Lightning Strike 101, called this behavior out as mind games. They said games are games, and games about the relationship are stupid. So what do you think about that perspective?
Well, I think it speaks to the frustration that a lot of people feel when they're dealing with this kind of indirect communication in relationships. It can create a lot of insecurity and distrust.
Yeah, for sure. It's like you're always trying to read between the lines.
Right.
Instead of just having a straightforward conversation. Another commenter, a few caned words, brought up their experience with ADHD and how challenging it can be for them to pick up on subtle social cues. They said, "If you don't simply tell me what is on your mind or what you actually want, I am going to take whatever you do tell me at face value and go with that."
That's a really important point because it highlights the fact that we all have different communication styles. And what one person might consider a hint or a test, another person might take literally.
Right.
So it really underscores the need for clarity and open communication.
Yeah, and JJ2K722 had a similar sentiment. They said, "Playing those non-communicative mind games is an absolute deal breaker. It can be okay jokingly, but if done seriously, I have no patience for it. I'm not a mind reader. And if you can't be upfront about silly things like what you want to eat or do, then WTF are we doing here?" And then they added a laughing emoji.
It sounds like this is something a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, it definitely struck a chord.
Yeah.
So why do you think people engage in these kinds of mind games?
Well, the term mind games itself is a little bit loaded, but I think it often refers to these behaviors that are designed to test or manipulate the other person. Sometimes it's a subconscious thing, like they're looking for reassurance or validation, but other times it might stem from deeper insecurities or a fear of being vulnerable.
So instead of communicating their needs directly, they try to elicit a specific reaction from their partner.
Exactly, and that's where it can become problematic because it creates this dynamic where one person is constantly trying to decipher the other person's true intentions.
It's like a guessing game.
Yeah.
And a lot of the commenters were speculating whether the girlfriend might be intentionally shit-testing her boyfriend.
Ah, yes, the infamous shit test.
Can you explain a little bit about what that is and why someone might do it?
Sure. So in the context of relationships, a shit test is basically a way to gauge your partner's commitment or test their boundaries. It can be intentional or unintentional, but it often involves creating a scenario or making a statement to see how the other person will react.
So like in this case, her comment about the meat shield could be seen as a way to see if he would stand up for himself
Exactly.
or try to placate her.
It's about seeing how they respond under pressure.
Okay, so not every ambiguous statement or action is necessarily a shit test.
Right. Sometimes it's just miscommunication.
But let's say for the sake of argument that this was a shit test. What are some of the potential downsides of using this kind of tactic?
Well, the biggest downside is that it erodes trust and creates uncertainty. Instead of fostering open communication, it encourages this dynamic of manipulation and second guessing.
And that can lead to resentment.
Exactly.
It's like you're constantly walking on eggshells.
Yeah, you're never quite sure where you stand.
And you can't really be yourself.
Right. It prevents you from feeling truly seen and understood.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the girlfriend side of things. But I want to shift gears for a minute and consider the boyfriend's perspective. What are some of the challenges he might be facing in this situation?
Well, he's definitely in a tough spot. He wants to be supportive, but he's also feeling hurt and confused. He's probably questioning his own instincts and wondering how to navigate this emotional minefield.
Right. It's like he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. If he tries to reassure her, he might come across as dismissive of her feelings. But if he challenges her, he risks escalating the conflict.
It's a tricky balance to strike.
For sure. And this situation really highlights the importance of good communication skills, not just in romantic relationships, but in all areas of our lives.
Absolutely.
Being able to articulate our thoughts and feelings clearly, listen actively to others, and respond with empathy.
Those are essential skills for healthy relationships.
I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground, and I want to give our listeners a chance to process everything we've discussed. But before we take a break, I want to remind you to check out our YouTube channel, Shauna Palage. It's packed with insightful videos on relationships, communication, and personal growth. And if you're enjoying this deep dive, make sure to subscribe to Voices of the Soul on your favorite podcast platform. That way you'll never miss an episode. We'll be right back with more insights and analysis after a short break.
Welcome back to Voices of the Soul. We're continuing our deep dive into this Reddit post about a couple's movie night that took an unexpected turn.
So before the break, we were talking about shit tests and the potential downsides of those kinds of behaviors. Are there any healthier ways to address those needs for reassurance and security in a relationship?
Absolutely. Open and direct communication is key. If you're feeling insecure or unsure about your partner's feelings, the best approach is to express those feelings directly. Instead of creating these scenarios to test their reactions, try saying something like, "Hey, I've been feeling a little insecure lately. Can you reassure me about where we stand?"
That's a great point. It's about addressing the underlying need directly instead of playing these guessing games.
Exactly. It's also important to focus on building a foundation of trust and mutual respect. That means being reliable, following through on your commitments, and being emotionally present for your partner. When you consistently show up for each other in these ways, it creates a sense of security that doesn't require constant testing or validation.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so going back to the Reddit post, there was a lot of discussion about the potential reasons behind the girlfriend's anger. Some commenters suggested that she might have been feeling threatened or insecure because of the movie scene, while others thought she could be projecting past experiences onto the situation. What are your thoughts on that?
It's definitely possible that the movie scene triggered some deeper emotions for her. Maybe she's had past experiences where she felt powerless or unsafe, and seeing that portrayal on screen brought up those feelings. Or perhaps she's struggling with insecurities in the relationship and is projecting those onto her boyfriend.
So like those seemingly small triggers can sometimes unearth a whole lot of unresolved baggage.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to approach these situations with empathy. Even if we don't fully understand our partner's reaction, we can at least acknowledge their feelings and try to see things from their perspective.
One commenter, Woodmom2262, suggested, "I would guess she is angry with herself. She is supposed to not need a man for anything, but she knows she could not handle that situation. Big conflict for women." That comment really resonated with a lot of people. What do you think is going on there?
I think that comment highlights the complex societal expectations that women often face. There's this message that they should be strong and independent, but also this lingering expectation that they need a man to protect them. It can create a lot of internal conflict.
So it's like she's caught between these conflicting ideas of what it means to be a woman in today's world.
Exactly. And it's not just women who are grappling with these evolving roles. Men are also navigating shifting expectations about masculinity and what it means to be a partner in a modern relationship.
It's like everyone's trying to figure out the new playbook, but the rules are still being written.
Right. And that's why it's so important to communicate openly and honestly with each other about our individual needs, expectations, and fears.
Absolutely. Now, before we get back to the boyfriend's perspective,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from our listeners. Have you ever experienced this kind of communication breakdown in your own relationships? Head over to our social media pages and share your thoughts. We're always eager to hear your stories and insights.
And speaking of insights, don't forget to check out Shauna Pelage's YouTube channel for more in-depth discussions on relationships, communication, and personal growth.
Right, she offers a lot of practical tips and advice that you can apply to your own life. Now let's circle back to the boyfriend in this Reddit post. He's clearly feeling hurt and confused by his girlfriend's reaction. What advice would you give him on how to navigate this situation?
I think the first step is to try to understand where she's coming from. Instead of getting defensive or trying to win the argument, he could try saying something like, I hear that you're upset, and I want to understand why. Can we talk about it when you're ready?
So it's about acknowledging her feelings and creating a safe space for her to share what's going on.
Exactly. It's about showing empathy and a willingness to listen. When she's calmed down, they can have a more productive conversation about their expectations and communication styles.
It's about shifting from a reactive mode to a more collaborative and understanding approach. What are some other things he can do to improve communication in the relationship?
Well, one important thing is to be mindful of his own communication style. Is he being clear and direct about his needs and feelings? Or is he hinting or making assumptions about what she's thinking?
That's a good point. It's easy to fall into patterns of indirect communication, especially if you're afraid of conflict or hurting your partner's feelings. But ultimately, honesty and clarity are essential for a healthy relationship.
Absolutely. And it's not just about what you say, but how you say it. Nonverbal cues like tone of voice and body language can also convey a lot of information. If he's approaching the conversation with defensiveness or frustration, she's likely to pick up on that and react accordingly.
So it's about being aware of both the verbal and nonverbal aspects of communication. What are some specific things he could do to communicate more effectively in this situation?
He could try using I statements to express his feelings. For example, I felt hurt when you said I was a meat shield because I care about you and want to protect you. This helps to avoid blaming or accusing her while still conveying his perspective.
See what you mean. It's about owning his feelings and expressing them in a way that invites dialogue rather than defensiveness.
Exactly. He could also try active listening techniques, like paraphrasing what she's saying to ensure he understands her perspective. For example, he could say, so you're saying that you want to feel like an equal partner, not someone who needs to be rescued.
It's about showing that he's truly listening and trying to understand her point of view.
Right. And it's about creating a space for both of them to feel heard and respected even when they disagree.
Now, some commenters suggested that the boyfriend should have responded to her meat shield comment with humor or sarcasm. What are your thoughts on that approach?
Humor can be a great way to diffuse tension, but it's important to use it carefully, especially when dealing with sensitive topics. If it's done in a way that minimizes her feelings or belittles her concerns, it could backfire and escalate the conflict.
Right. It's all about reading the room and using humor appropriately. If it's done with genuine affection and a lighthearted spirit, it can be a helpful tool for navigating difficult conversations. But if it's used as a weapon or a way to avoid addressing the underlying issues, it can be counterproductive.
Exactly. And sometimes the best approach is simply to acknowledge the gravity of the situation and say something like, this is clearly important to you and I want to understand why. Can we talk about it more when you're ready?
That's great advice. It's about prioritizing empathy and understanding over trying to win the argument or get the last word.
And it's about remembering that relationships are a journey, not a destination. There will be bumps in the road and communication breakdowns are inevitable. But when we approach those challenges with a spirit of collaboration and a willingness to learn and grow together, we can strengthen our bonds and create a more fulfilling partnership.
I love that. It's about embracing the messiness of relationships and seeing those challenges as opportunities for growth. Welcome back to Voices of the Soul. We're wrapping up our deep dive into this Reddit relationship saga. We've been talking about communication styles and shit tests and the importance of empathy, but this conversation has also brought up some bigger questions about societal expectations and how they can influence our relationships. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting how this seemingly simple scenario taps into those broader cultural narratives. The girlfriend's initial statement about not wanting to be a meat shield, it seems to touch on the evolving roles of men and women, particularly when it comes to ideas about protection and agency.
Right, and one commenter, Woodmom2262, they said, I would guess she is angry with herself. She's supposed to not need a man for anything, but she knows she could not handle that situation. big conflict for women.
Mm.
And so many people really resonated with that sentiment. What do you think is going on there?
Well, I think it speaks to that internal conflict that a lot of women experience in today's society. There's this message that they should be strong and independent, capable of handling anything on their own, but at the same time, there are these lingering traditional expectations that men should be the protectors. And it can create this real sense of cognitive dissonance,
Right.
you
So it's
know?
like a double bind
Right.
where women are told they can have it all, career, family, independence, but then there's still this underlying assumption that they need a man to step in and save them.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly confusing and frustrating, both for women and for the men in their lives.
Yeah.
Men might feel pressured to live up to this outdated ideal of masculinity, while women might feel conflicted about expressing vulnerability or asking for help.
It's like everyone is trying to navigate this constantly shifting landscape of gender roles and relationship dynamics. And it's no wonder there are so many misunderstandings along the way.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to have open and honest conversations with our partners about these issues. What does protection mean to each of us? How do we define strength and independence in the context of our relationship? It's about creating a shared understanding that works for both individuals.
So it's not about trying to fit into some predetermined mold, but rather about defining what those concepts mean for you as a couple.
Exactly. And recognizing that those definitions might evolve over time as we grow and change as individuals, it's an ongoing dialogue, not a one-time conversation.
One commenter, Ios Caleb, suggested an alternative way the boyfriend could have responded to the girlfriend's meat shield comment. They said he could have said something like, "I know you're an adult and that you can stand up for yourself, and I appreciate your concern for me, but because I care about you, my instinct would still be to put myself between you and danger." What do you think of that response?
Oh, I think that's a brilliant example of how to acknowledge both the girlfriend's independence and the boyfriend's protective instincts. Without dismissing either perspective, it's a balanced response that could have potentially de-escalated the situation and opened the door for a more constructive conversation.
It's like he's saying, "I respect your strength, but I also love you and would do anything to keep you safe." It's a way of finding that sweet spot between honoring boundaries and expressing care.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of finding a language that works for both partners, a way of communicating that feels authentic and respectful, even when navigating challenging topics.
I think that's a fantastic takeaway. It's not about finding the perfect words, but rather about striving for understanding and connection, even amidst disagreements.
And remembering that relationships are a journey of learning and growth, both individually and as a couple. There will be moments of friction and miscommunication, but those challenges can ultimately make the bond stronger if approached with compassion and a willingness to learn from each other.
Beautifully said. Well, on that note, it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've explored so many layers of this Reddit post, and I hope our listeners have found it as thought-provoking as we have.
It's been a fascinating conversation, and I always appreciate the opportunity to delve into these relationship complexities with you.
And remember, dear listeners, every relationship has its own unique dynamics and challenges. But with open communication, empathy, and a willingness to grow together, we can navigate those complexities and create relationships that are both fulfilling and enduring.
And if you're craving more insights on relationships, communication, and personal growth, be sure to check out Shauna Pelage's YouTube channel. She's a wealth of knowledge and inspiration.
Absolutely. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to Voices of the Soul wherever you get your podcasts. And leave us a review if you're enjoying the show. We love hearing from you.
Until next time, keep those conversations flowing. And remember, love is a journey, not a destination.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.